In a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills, life moved at a leisurely pace. The air was always filled with the sound of birds chirping and the faint hum of conversations from nearby homes. Among the townsfolk lived Emily Carter, a woman whose presence blended seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. She wasn't flashy or loud, just a quiet seamstress who spent her days stitching beautiful patterns onto cloth. Her shop, tucked away on a quiet street, had become a favorite spot for locals looking for custom dresses, curtains, or even embroidered gifts. To most people, Emily seemed like an ordinary woman. She wore simple clothes, spoke softly, and carried herself with a calm demeanor that made her easy to underestimate. Neighbors often remarked how humble she was, never asking for much and always willing to help others. What they didn't realize was that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a sharp mind, a mind honed by years of studying law at one of the country's top universities. Emily's journey into the world of law had been fueled by a deep desire to fight injustice. As a young woman, she excelled in her studies, graduating at the top of her class. But the more time she spent working in high-profile firms, the more disillusioned she became. She saw lawyers twist facts, judges favor the wealthy, and innocent people crushed under the weight of unfair systems. It broke her heart. Eventually, she decided to leave it all behind, retreating to her hometown, where she thought she could find peace. But Emily didn't abandon her passion for justice entirely. Instead, she channeled it into something unexpected: sewing. While her hands worked tirelessly on fabrics, her ears were tuned to audiobooks about legal strategies, landmark cases, and courtroom tactics. Every stitch she made seemed to echo the rhythm of her thoughts as she absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Over time, her sewing room transformed into a treasure trove of legal wisdom. Stacks of books lined the shelves. Notebooks brimmed with handwritten notes, and sticky tabs marked important pages. Despite her brilliance, Emily kept her true talents hidden. To her neighbors, she was just the nice lady who fixes hems. No one suspected that she spent her evenings analyzing complex laws or memorizing obscure statutes. Even Judge Harold Langston, a man known for his arrogance and shady dealings, dismissed her as someone too simple to pose any threat. He had no idea that this quiet seamstress was far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. One day, while walking through town, Emily overheard whispers about Judge Langston's latest scheme. Apparently, he'd manipulated yet another case to benefit a rich developer. People shook their heads in frustration, but did nothing. They believed standing up to him was futile. Emily listened silently, her jaw tightening slightly. Though she preferred to stay out of trouble, this particular story struck a nerve. Little did anyone know, including Judge Langston, that Emily's patience was wearing thin. And when the judge set his sights on her, thinking she'd be an easy target, he unknowingly stepped onto a battlefield where he was completely outmatched. Judge Harold Langston was a man who thrived on control. With his neatly pressed robes, stern gaze, and commanding voice, he ruled the local courthouse like it was his personal kingdom. To the townspeople, he was an intimidating figure, someone whose word was law, quite literally. But behind closed doors, Langston's reputation was far from noble. He was known for bending rules to suit his needs, favoring those with money and power, while crushing anyone who dared oppose him. Langston had big plans for the town, and they all revolved around expanding his wealth. One day, while reviewing property records, he stumbled upon something that caught his eye: a small plot of land owned by Emily Carter. It wasn't much, a modest stretch of grass and trees, but its location made it incredibly valuable. The neighboring properties were already owned by wealthy developers planning to build a luxury resort. If Langston could acquire Emily's land, he'd profit handsomely from the deal. But there was one problem. Emily had no intention of selling. When approached by agents offering large sums of money, she politely declined, saying the land held sentimental value. This refusal infuriated Langston. How dare this simple woman stand in the way of progress and his profits? Determined to get what he wanted, He hatched a plan to force her hand. If she wouldn't sell willingly, he'd find another way to take the land from her. Langston knew the legal system inside and out, and he used his knowledge to orchestrate a devious scheme. Using forged documents, he created evidence suggesting that Emily hadn't paid taxes on her business earnings for several years. These fake papers painted her as a negligent taxpayer, someone unworthy of owning property. Confident that his plan would work, he issued a summons ordering Emily to appear in court to answer for these alleged crimes. The news spread quickly through the town. Neighbors whispered about how unfortunate it was that sweet Emily had gotten herself into trouble. Most assumed she'd crumble under the pressure. After all, how could someone like her, a seamstress with no apparent legal experience, possibly defend herself against such serious charges? Even Emily's closest friends expressed sympathy, believing she'd been caught in an honest mistake. What Langston didn't realize, however, was that he had underestimated his opponent. While everyone else saw Emily as a quiet, unassuming woman, she had spent years preparing for moments like this, not because she expected trouble, but because she believed in being ready for anything. As she read over the summons, her expression remained calm, almost serene. There was no panic, no fear, just a flicker of determination in her eyes. Unbeknownst to Langston, Emily had already begun analyzing every detail of the case. She noticed inconsistencies in the paperwork right away, tiny details that seemed off, like mismatched dates or signatures that didn't align with official records. To most people, these might have gone unnoticed, but Emily's trained eye caught them immediately. Quietly, she started gathering information, piecing together clues that would eventually expose Langston's plot. For now, though, Emily kept her cards close to her chest. She attended the first court hearing dressed simply, carrying only a notebook and pen. Her demeanor was polite yet reserved, giving nothing away. Langston watched her from the bench, convinced he had won before the battle even began. But deep down, Emily knew something he didn't. This wasn't just about saving her land. It was about proving that even the most powerful people could be held accountable. And she was ready to show him exactly how wrong he was. The day of the first hearing arrived, and the small courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors filled the wooden benches, curious to see how Emily would handle herself against Judge Langston's accusations. Some had come out of concern for her, while others were simply intrigued by the drama. The atmosphere was tense, with murmurs filling the air as people speculated about what might happen next. Emily walked in quietly, dressed in a plain blouse and skirt. She carried nothing but a worn notebook and a pen, looking every bit like the unassuming seamstress everyone thought she was. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the storm brewing around her. As she took her seat, Judge Langston leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. To him, this case was already decided. He just needed to go through the motions before claiming victory. The prosecutor, a young man eager to impress the judge, stood up and began laying out the charges. He spoke confidently, presenting the forged documents as if they were irrefutable proof of Emily's wrongdoing. "Your Honor," he declared, "the evidence clearly shows that Ms. Carter failed to pay taxes on her business earnings for 3 consecutive years. This is not only illegal but also demonstrates negligence on her part." As the prosecutor droned on, Emily listened intently, her eyes scanning the papers handed to her. She didn't interrupt or react visibly, but her mind raced. Already, she was spotting flaws in their case. Tiny inconsistencies that seemed insignificant to most but screamed foul play to her trained eye. When the prosecutor finished speaking, Langston turned to Emily, expecting her to falter under pressure. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Emily rose slowly, her movements deliberate. For a moment, there was silence as all eyes focused on her. Then, in a steady voice, she began to speak. "Your Honor, I'd like to request access to certain financial records related to my business. Additionally, I'd like to cite Section 407 of the Tax Code, which outlined specific procedures for notifying taxpayers of alleged discrepancies. Her words hung in the air, surprising everyone, including Langston. The judge's smirk faltered slightly as he processed what she had just said. No one expected her to know such technical details, let alone reference obscure statutes. Still, Langston quickly regained his composure, dismissing her requests as irrelevant. "We'll address those later," he snapped, trying to move past her objections. But Emily wasn't done yet. Before sitting back down, she added calmly, "I'd also like to note that some of the dates mentioned in these documents don't align with official tax filing deadlines. Perhaps we can explore that further during cross-examination." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of this sudden turn of events. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Langston, however, waved off her comments impatiently, insisting the court proceed as planned. Despite his dismissive attitude, something about Emily's poise lingered in the room long after she sat down. A few spectators couldn't help but wonder, was she really as simple as she seemed? Could there be more to this quiet seamstress than anyone realized? Unbeknownst to them, Emily's calculated remarks were just the beginning. While Langston believed he still held all the cards, she was planting seeds of doubt, not just in the minds of those present, but within the very foundation of his fabricated case. And though the hearing ended without a resolution, Emily left the courthouse with a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She knew exactly what she was doing, and the real battle was only just beginning. Back home, Emily transformed her cozy living room into a command center. The sewing machine was pushed aside to make room for stacks of legal books, notebooks filled with scribbled notes, and printouts of financial records. Her dining table became a war zone of highlighters, sticky tabs, and flowcharts mapping out every detail of Judge Langston's scheme. To anyone else, it might have looked chaotic, but to Emily, it was a carefully constructed plan waiting to unfold. The first thing she did was dive deeper into the forged documents presented in court. She examined them under a magnifying glass, scrutinizing every signature, date stamp, and line of text. It didn't take long for her sharp eye to spot glaring inconsistencies. Things like mismatched fonts, incorrect tax codes, and signatures that didn't match official records. These weren't just minor errors. They were red flags pointing directly to foul play. But Emily knew instinctively that exposing these flaws wouldn't be enough. She needed proof that tied the fraudulent documents back to Langston himself. So she turned to public databases and online resources, combing through property records, corporate filings, and financial disclosures. Late into the night, fueled by cups of tea, she pieced together a trail leading to a shell company, a front used to create the fake evidence against her. And when she traced ownership of that company, her heart raced. It led straight to Judge Langston. This discovery gave her confidence, but Emily also understood the importance of building a solid case. She spent hours researching similar cases where judges or officials had been caught manipulating legal systems. She studied their tactics, learned how they defended themselves, and identified ways to counteract their arguments. Every precedent she uncovered added another weapon to her arsenal. Meanwhile, word about Emily's surprising performance in court began spreading around town. People whispered about how composed she'd been, how she cited laws no one had ever heard of. Some locals started questioning whether there was more to her than met the eye. A few even approached her shop, offering support or asking if there was anything they could do to help. At first, Emily politely declined, wanting to keep her focus sharp. But as the days passed, she realized this growing curiosity could work in her favor. One evening, while organizing her notes, Emily decided to plant subtle hints among trusted neighbors. She casually mentioned finding strange things in the documents and shared vague details about irregularities she'd noticed. Word spread quickly, and soon, speculation about Langston's involvement grew louder. Local journalists picked up on the buzz, starting to dig into the judge's past dealings. Emily didn't need to say much, just enough to nudge people toward the truth. As the pieces came together, Emily felt a quiet satisfaction. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been wronged by Langston's corruption. Still, she remained cautious. This wasn't over yet, and she knew Langston wouldn't go down without a fight. For now, though, she allowed herself a small moment of triumph. Sitting back in her chair, she glanced at the clock. It was late, but sleep could wait. Tomorrow, she'd take the next step. And this time, she'd be ready to strike. With each passing day, Emily grew more determined. What started as a personal battle had turned into something bigger, a chance to expose the truth and hold power accountable. And she knew, deep down, that she was only getting started. The next hearing was nothing short of a spectacle. Word had spread quickly about Emily's unexpected legal prowess, and the courtroom was packed with curious onlookers. Neighbors crammed onto wooden benches, journalists scribbled notes in the corners, and even a few local officials showed up, intrigued by the unfolding drama. The air buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited to see what Emily would do next. When the session began, Langston wasted no time trying to regain control. He instructed the prosecutor to call their first witness, a clerk from the tax office who claimed to have processed Emily's delinquent payments. The man took the stand looking nervous but determined to stick to his rehearsed story. As he recounted how Emily's supposed failures had triggered an investigation, Langston nodded approvingly from the bench, clearly satisfied with the narrative being spun. But Emily wasn't fazed. When it was her turn to cross-examine the witness, she stood calmly, her notebook in hand. Her questions started off simple, confirming dates, clarifying procedures, and asking for specifics about the alleged discrepancies. At first, the clerk answered confidently, sticking to the script he'd been given. But as Emily pressed further, her tone remained polite yet relentless. "Can you explain why the document you're referencing shows a filing deadline that doesn't match official records?" she asked, holding up a copy of the disputed paperwork. The clerk hesitated, glancing toward the prosecutor for guidance. When he stumbled over his answer, Emily followed up with another question, pointing out inconsistencies in his testimony. One by one, she dismantled his claims until his entire story collapsed under scrutiny. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Emily moved on to the next piece of evidence, the forged documents themselves. She presented enlarged copies of the papers, highlighting every flaw she had uncovered. Mismatched fonts, incorrect tax codes, and signatures that didn't align with official records. Then came the bombshell. With quiet authority, she revealed her findings about the shell company tied to Judge Langston. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge directly, "these documents appear to originate from a company registered under your name. Can you explain this connection?" Langston's face turned red, his composure cracking for the first time. He stammered something about irrelevance, but his unease was palpable. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as spectators exchanged shocked glances. Even the prosecutor looked flustered, unsure how to respond to Emily's revelations. Undeterred, Emily continued, citing case after case where similar schemes had been exposed. She quoted statutes, referenced precedents, and methodically connected the dots between Langston's actions and the fabricated charges against her. Each word landed like a hammer blow, chipping away at the foundation of his carefully constructed lie. By the time she finished her argument, the room was electric with tension. People whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others nodded in admiration. For the first time, Judge Langston seemed vulnerable, his arrogance replaced by desperation as he struggled to keep his facade intact. As the hearing adjourned, Emily stepped outside to find a small group of supporters waiting for her. They clapped softly, offering words of encouragement. Though she smiled graciously, her focus never wavered. She knew the fight wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain: Langston's grip on power was slipping, and Emily wasn't about to let him get away with it. The fallout from Emily's explosive revelations was immediate and far-reaching. News of Judge Langston's alleged involvement in the forgery spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across the town. Journalists who had initially dismissed the case as routine suddenly smelled a much bigger story. Armed with anonymous tips, later traced back to Emily, they began digging into Langston's past, uncovering a trail of corruption that stretched back years. Reports surfaced about other victims who had fallen prey to Langston's schemes. A local farmer revealed how he'd been forced to sell his land after being falsely accused of zoning violations. A struggling single mother recounted how she lost custody of her children due to fabricated evidence mysteriously appearing in court. Each story added fuel to the growing firestorm, painting Langston not just as a bad judge, but as a predator who exploited his position for personal gain. Public pressure mounted rapidly. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for Emily Carter" and "No more corruption." Local leaders, sensing the tide turning against Langston, demanded answers. Even higher authorities couldn't ignore the outcry. Within days, an official inquiry was launched into Langston's conduct, with investigators poring over financial records, property transactions, and old case files. Back at home, Emily worked tirelessly to ensure every detail of her case was airtight. She knew Langston would try to wriggle free, using his connections or spinning new lies to save himself. To counter this, she meticulously documented everything: timelines, witness statements, and legal precedents. Her dining table overflowed with papers, each one marked with notes and cross-references. If anyone questioned her claims, she wanted to be ready. Despite the mounting threats, from veiled warnings left on her doorstep to menacing phone calls late at night, Emily refused to back down. Instead, she leaned on the growing support around her. Neighbors took turns keeping watch outside her shop, ensuring she felt safe. Others offered to testify if needed, sharing their own experiences of injustice at Langston's hands. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel alone. The community had rallied behind her, united by a shared desire for accountability. Meanwhile, Langston grew increasingly desperate. His once imposing presence in court now seemed fragile, his confidence shattered. At the next hearing, he tried to discredit Emily's findings, calling them baseless speculation. But his arguments fell flat, undermined by the mountain of evidence she continued to present. Every attempt to deflect only made him look guiltier. As the investigation deepened, cracks appeared not just in Langston's defenses, but in his entire career. Investigators uncovered bank accounts linked to shell companies, luxury properties bought under false names, and secret deals brokered with wealthy developers. It became clear that Emily's case was merely the tip of the iceberg, a single thread pulled loose from a tightly woven web of deceit. For Emily, this wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about sending a message. She stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, intimidated, or pushed aside by people like Langston. And as the truth came to light, something remarkable happened. Hope returned to the town. People began believing again, not just in justice, but in the power of standing together. Though the battle was far from over, Emily could see the finish line ahead. With every piece of evidence laid bare, with every corrupt act exposed, she moved closer to proving that even the most powerful figures were not above the law. And when the final gavel struck, she knew it wouldn't just mark the end of Langston's reign. It would signal the beginning of a new chapter for her community. The final showdown arrived on a crisp morning, the courtroom packed to capacity. Every seat was taken. Locals, reporters, and even curious visitors from neighboring towns filled the benches. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. All eyes were on Emily as she entered, calm and composed, her notebook tucked neatly under her arm. Judge Langston, seated at the bench, looked pale and uneasy, his usual arrogance replaced by thinly veiled panic. As the hearing began, investigators presented their findings in painstaking detail. They laid out the evidence linking Langston to the shell company that had forged the documents against Emily. Bank statements, property records, and emails painted a damning picture of greed and manipulation. Witnesses who had once feared retaliation now stepped forward, recounting how Langston had coerced or deceived them into silence. Each testimony added another layer to the unraveling scandal. When it was Emily's turn to speak, the room fell silent. Standing before the judge and spectators, she delivered a closing argument so powerful it left jaws dropped. Her voice was steady but firm as she methodically dismantled Langston's defense. She cited laws he had broken, highlighted inconsistencies in his explanations, and connected every piece of evidence back to him. But what truly captivated the audience was her passion, not for revenge, but for justice. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the presiding judge overseeing the case, not Langston, "this isn't just about me or my land. It's about holding someone accountable when they abuse their power. Judge Langston has spent years exploiting the very system he swore to uphold. He has ruined lives, silenced voices, and betrayed the trust of everyone here today. If we allow this behavior to go unchecked, then what kind of message does that send? That those in power are untouchable." Her words resonated deeply. People nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. Even the stern-faced judges on the panel seemed moved, exchanging glances as Emily spoke. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, a rare occurrence in a courtroom. The bailiff quickly called for order, but the moment lingered, a testament to Emily's courage and conviction. Langston, visibly shaken, tried one last time to salvage his reputation. He claimed ignorance, blamed rogue employees, and accused Emily of orchestrating a witch hunt. But his excuses rang hollow, undermined by the overwhelming evidence stacked against him. For the first time, he looked small, less like an intimidating figure of authority, and more like a man cornered by his own misdeeds. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the gavel struck. The head judge announced the verdict. Judge Harold Langston was found guilty of misconduct, forgery, and abuse of power. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the reality sank in. Not only would Langston lose his position, but he would also face criminal charges, pending further investigation. As the courtroom emptied, people surrounded Emily, shaking her hand and thanking her for standing up to tyranny. Reporters clamored for interviews, but she politely declined, saying simply, "This isn't about me. It's about proving that no one is above the law." That evening, as Emily walked home beneath the setting sun, she felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been exhausting, but it was worth it. Justice had prevailed, not just for her, but for everyone who had suffered under Langston's rule. And though she knew challenges still lay ahead, she also knew something else. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to fight for what's right to spark real change. In the weeks that followed Judge Langston's downfall, life in the small town began to change. The once oppressive shadow of corruption lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and possibility. People who had long been afraid to speak out now felt empowered to share their stories. Local officials vowed to implement reforms, promising transparency and accountability in every decision moving forward. It was as if Emily's victory had awakened something dormant within the community, a belief that justice could prevail, even against the most powerful foes. For Emily, however, life returned to its quiet rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. Her sewing shop reopened, welcoming customers eager not only for her handiwork, but also to thank her personally. Neighbors brought flowers, baked goods, and heartfelt notes, each one expressing gratitude for what she had done. Some even joked that they'd never look at a seamstress the same way again. Emily accepted their kindness with grace, always quick to remind them that she was just an ordinary person doing what anyone should have done. But beneath her modest exterior, Emily carried a newfound purpose. Inspired by the support she received, and haunted by memories of those she'd helped save from similar injustices, she made a bold decision to reopen her legal practice. This time, though, it wouldn't be about climbing corporate ladders or chasing prestige. Instead, she focused on offering pro bono services to people who couldn't afford representation. Whether it was helping a single mother fight eviction or guiding a struggling farmer through tax disputes, Emily became a beacon of fairness and resilience. Her reputation grew beyond the town borders. Journalists wrote articles calling her the seamstress turned legal hero, while social media buzzed with admiration for her courage and intelligence. Invitations poured in, from universities asking her to give lectures, organizations seeking her advice on fighting corruption, and even lawmakers hoping to learn from her insights. Emily politely declined most offers, preferring to stay grounded in her work. But when she did accept invitations, she used the platform to advocate for systemic change, urging others to question authority and demand integrity. Despite her growing fame, Emily remained humble. She still spent hours at her sewing machine, finding peace in the rhythmic hum of needle and thread. To her, stitching fabric wasn't all that different from rebuilding lives. It required patience, precision, and care. And much like her legal battles, every stitch told a story. Years later, Emily's name became synonymous with justice and perseverance. Parents told their children tales of how a quiet seamstress took down a corrupt judge, proving that strength often hides in unexpected places. Her story served as a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear aprons and carry notebooks. One evening, as Emily sat by her window watching the sunset, she reflected on everything that had happened. The journey hadn't been easy. It had tested her resolve, pushed her to her limits, and forced her to confront fears she didn't know she had. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself, guided by a simple yet powerful principle. The law exists to protect everyone, not just the privileged few. With a soft smile, Emily picked up her needle and thread, ready to tackle whatever came next. After all, there were still seams to mend and battles to fight.